The early morning chill seemed to pierce his thin clothes and dust-stained skin. He staggered with half-closed eyes, his vision blurred and feet numb. His breathing was short, weak, almost imperceptible. Some passers-by averted their gaze, hastening their steps upon seeing him falter. No one extended a hand. When he fell to his knees, the dull thud echoed on the concrete floor. No one will see me. No one ever sees, he thought, as the world around him dissolved into the icy silence. I just wanted to sleep a little. Just a little. Nina was leaving the on-call room by chance, adjusting her badge on her pocket, when she caught sight of the collapsed boy near the stairs. Her eyes immediately widened, and her legs ran before her mind could order them to. She knelt beside him and touched his cold face with trembling hands. "Someone help, please!" she shouted with a choked voice. "This boy is going to die out here." Several glances turned, but no one approached. Nina lifted her eyes, furious. "Call a stretcher now, he's hypothermic and malnourished." A nurse hesitated on the internal phone. "He doesn't have a file here, ma'am." Nina stood up, facing all the glances. "And do you need a file to live? Do something." 3 minutes later, with the reluctant help of 2 paramedics, Ethan's light body was placed on a stretcher. Nina followed the group down the inner corridor, her expression a mixture of relief and indignation. A doctor appeared at the triage door, frowning. "He's stable. We can just rehydrate and release him." Nina firmly confronted him. "He has nowhere to go. Are you going to put him back out in the cold after all this?" The doctor sighed, crossing his arms. "We don't have any spare beds." Nina approached him, her eyes fixed. "Then take one of the unnecessary ones. In the meantime, he'll stay under my supervision." Silence fell for a moment. "If necessary, I'll take full responsibility." A few hours later, Ethan's eyes opened with difficulty. The white light on the ceiling seemed too bright, the sounds too shrill. Monitors beeped, voices passed in the background. He shrank, pulling the sheets up to his chin. "Where am I?" he mumbled, scared. Nina was sitting beside the stretcher, holding a cup of cold coffee. When she heard him, she stood up gently. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. You're in the hospital." Ethan tried to get up but recoiled with a grimace. "I didn't mean to bother." Nina smiled, sitting down again. "You didn't bother. You needed help, and I was here." The silence that followed was brief, broken by Nina's deep sigh. "There's a man here. He's terminally ill. He hasn't received visitors for days." Ethan slowly turned his face, frowning. "He's alone?" Nina nodded, fidgeting with the edge of her coat. "Yes, not a single relative has shown up since he arrived." Ethan straightened up a bit, feeling his dormant hunger awaken along with curiosity. "Can I stay with him? In the same room?" Nina looked at him in surprise. "Are you sure he's not exactly pleasant company?" The boy lowered his eyes thoughtfully. "Nobody needs to be pleasant when they're dying. They just need to not be alone." The door was firmly opened, and Leonard strode in, his steps heavy and his expression impatient. "What's going on here?" Nina stood up, but kept her tone calm. "We're discussing the possibility of the boy staying in the vacant room with the palliative care patient." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "You want to put a minor in the same room as a terminal patient? That violates all protocols." Nina crossed her arms. "And leaving a child unaccompanied in the waiting room would be better. He has no one, Leonard." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're emotionally involved. It's compromising your judgment." Nina stared him down, unblinking. "If wanting to show humanity is a mistake, then judge me for it." Leonard left without answering, but he didn't prevent the transfer. Nina accompanied Ethan down the corridor as an assistant pushed the makeshift wheelchair. The boy looked around, his eyes attentive to every detail. The cold lights overhead, the strong smell of alcohol and disinfectant, the metal plaques on the doors. "This place is big, and it seems sad," he said softly. Nina smiled wryly. "It wasn't always like this. I've seen people leaving here laughing." Ethan gripped the arms of the chair tightly. "Maybe he'll smile too if I'm there." Nina laughed gently. "You have a way of speaking that dismantles any rule." When they reached the room's door, Nina signaled for them to enter slowly. The environment was dimly lit, with the curtains half drawn. Walter lay with his face turned towards the wall, his skin extremely pale and his eyes tightly shut. His expression was hard, impenetrable, as if he were in a distant place where no one else could reach him. Ethan carefully stepped down from the chair and walked silently to the bedside, stopping a few paces away and clasping his hands in front of his body. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said softly. Walter didn't react. Nina watched from the doorway, not interrupting. "I promise I'll be quiet and respectful." Walter's only response was a slight movement of his hand, as if brushing away a thought. Ethan sat in an empty chair in the corner of the room, watching the heart monitor intently. Nina approached and gently touched the boy's shoulder. "He hears more than he shows. He just needs time." Ethan nodded. "I know what it's like not to want to talk, but I also know what it's like to want to and have no one." Nina sat on the edge of a chair. "You have someone now." For the first time, Ethan smiled. Maybe he does too. The room remained silent for the next few minutes, filled only by the sound of machines, the dripping of the IV, and Walter's slow breathing. Ethan looked at Nina with restrained sincerity. "I don't know if he'll like me, but I'll try." Because he seems more tired than angry. Nina stood up and smoothed the sheet on the empty bed. "That's more than many adults would do." Ethan looked out the window, where the city lights blinked in the distance. "I've never had a room of my own." Maybe sharing with him is already a start. Dawn arrived slowly in the muffled room. The muted sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, interrupted by the steady drip of the IV and the low hum of the machines monitoring Walter's vitals. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, as if trying to avoid waking from a dream. He looked at the white ceiling, then turned his face towards the bed beside him. Walter was motionless, his eyes closed, as if time didn't pass for him. The boy sat on the bed, scratched his tousled hair, and cleared his throat softly. "I think I overslept, but then it's been a while since I've slept without fear of being kicked." He stretched his legs under the sheet and spoke casually, not expecting a response. There was a place behind a bakery that was the best in the world. The floor was warm because of the oven, and in the early morning you could smell the scent of burnt bread. He leaned back against the headboard, looking at Walter, who kept his eyes closed. "Sometimes I would hear the sirens and think they would take me away from there, but it was just someone else being taken away." The silence seemed like a thick wall between them. Ethan sighed. "Even when it was bad, at least I knew what to expect. Now everything is strange, but a good strange." Walter took a deep breath but said nothing. He merely slowly turned his face away from Ethan, as if wanting to escape the sound of that voice too fragile for so much past. The boy lowered his eyes for a moment and smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "There was this guy once. He would stay quiet like that too. Never said a word. And one day he threw a piece of pizza onto my lap, cold and half-eaten." Walter suddenly opened his eyes and slowly turned his face, his eyes fixed harshly on Ethan. "You're comparing me to a bum who throws food scraps?" Ethan's eyes widened and he shook his head. "No, sir, I just thought..." Walter's breathing became heavier for a moment, but he fell silent. The room filled with a tension that seemed to cling to the walls. Ethan rubbed his face and looked at the floor. "Sorry if I said something stupid. I'm just trying to make conversation. It's just that sometimes I speak without thinking. I grew up having to laugh before others laughed at me." He swallowed hard and looked back at Walter. "But I'm not just that. I've taken a lot of beatings, but I've also learned to listen and to respect silence, even when it hurts." Walter didn't respond, but his eyes remained open, fixed on some point beyond the window. Ethan remained silent for a time, then stood up and walked slowly to the window. He looked outside, where the sky was beginning to brighten behind the buildings. "I've always wanted to see the sunrise from a high place, but today I'm seeing it from a hospital." Walter watched him out of the corner of his eye, his expression difficult to read. The boy returned to the bed, sitting down slowly. "I'm not just a dirty street kid, and you're not just a man tied to wires. Maybe if we talk, things won't look so ugly around here." Walter didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth trembled slightly, as if he were holding back something he couldn't even name. The room door opened carefully and Nina entered, holding a clipboard in one hand and a concerned expression on her face. She looked at the two of them and paused for a second, sensing the tense atmosphere between them. "Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Ethan smiled awkwardly. Just his silence and mine too. Nina walked to the edge of Walter's bed and checked the monitors. The signals are stable. But the atmosphere in here seems to have dropped in temperature, huh? Ethan laughed uncomfortably. I think I talked too much. Again. Walter turned his face to the wall. And he does talk. While Nina adjusted the IV drip, Ethan turned his gaze to the open door and saw Leonard on the other side of the corridor, leaning against the wall, talking on the phone. The tone was low but firm, and his eyes were fixed on the floor as if he were dealing with something delicate. Nina also noticed and sighed, finishing adjusting the equipment. I'll go get the medication. I'll be right back. She left and Ethan continued watching Leonard until he saw him turn his back and disappear down the hallway. He always talks like that, like he's hiding something. Walter did not respond, but his hand moved slowly over the sheet, as if grasping something invisible. The silence returned, but Ethan did not remain quiet. Do you think I'm a problem? You can say it. I've been told that so many times it's almost my name. Walter let out a low sound, almost a dry laugh, and turned his face toward the boy. You talk too much for someone who says they've been beaten down by life. Ethan clenched his fists, but kept his gaze steady. And you hide too much for someone who no longer has time to waste. Walter stared at the boy for a moment, and this time did not look away. You have answers for everything, don't you? Ethan shrugged. I don't. I just don't want to be invisible. The room remained silent for several minutes, but something had changed. Walter closed his eyes again, but his body was no longer so rigid. Ethan leaned his head back on the pillow, but kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling. You seem angry all the time, but there must be a reason, right? Nobody turns to stone out of nowhere. Walter let out a deeper, almost imperceptible sigh. Stones are safer than people. Ethan slowly turned his face, calmly looking at the old man. Maybe, but stones also sink when thrown into water. Walter did not respond, but did not turn his face away again. Nina returned a few minutes later, bringing with her a small cup with pills. She stopped beside Walter's bed and extended her hand. Time for your medicine. Walter took the cup slowly and swallowed the pills without a word. Nina looked at Ethan, then at Walter, and narrowed her eyes slightly. Did you two fight? Ethan shook his head. We bumped into words, but no one fell. Nina smiled wryly. Sometimes that's how a friendship begins. Walter snorted. Friendship is a luxury, and I don't have time for luxury. Ethan immediately retorted, chin raised. Then make the most of the time you have left and don't waste it arguing with me. Walter cast an uncomfortable glance at the boy, as if he were on the verge of saying something he'd rather keep quiet. You speak as if the world were still fair. Ethan didn't blink. I don't think it is, but I'm still here, so I'll keep talking. Nina watched the exchange intently, without interrupting. The tension seemed to have changed in tone. It was no longer pure hostility, but something more complex. Walter shifted in bed and closed his eyes. If you're going to keep talking, then make it worthwhile. Ethan smiled but didn't respond. He merely pulled the sheet and lay down again, satisfied with the breach he had opened. Maybe I'll manage, if you keep listening. The sound of a pencil scratching paper filled the room like a soft, persistent soundtrack. Ethan, sitting in the armchair by the window, kept his eyes fixed on the sheets he had obtained from Nina. He scribbled eagerly, his tongue between his teeth, focused on creating something only he could see. Walter, in bed, eyes half open, listened to every stroke with a growing, suppressed irritation. His face remained impassive, but the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed his discomfort. Still, he didn't say a word. Do you intend to drill through the floor with that pencil? He muttered, without looking at him. Ethan paused for a moment, raising his eyes. Sorry, I get a bit carried away when I start. He went back to tracing the lines with less intensity, but no less enthusiasm. His gaze drifted to the shelf beside Walter's bed, where some worn books rested. Those books there, they look old. Have you read them all? Walter responded with a vague nod. I've read them. I wrote too, before. Ethan's eyes widened and he dropped his pencil. You wrote for real? Walter nodded, but his tone was distant, as if each word were being taken from a dusty drawer. It's been a while. It was another life. Ethan moved closer, papers in hand, and sat nearer the bed. I've always wanted to write. Stories, you know. the kind that makes you forget where you are. He lifted a sheet with crooked drawings and tiny letters. This one's about a boy who turns into a little bird, but I never had a notebook of my own. I'd always grab paper from the trash and borrow pens when they'd lend them to me. Walter observed the scribbles without saying a word. His eyes rested a bit longer on a misspelled yet intentional word. For a brief moment, the corner of his mouth threatened to smile, but he disguised it by turning his face away. Stories don't change the world, boy. They only distract. From the hallway, Nina passed by with a small medication cart. As she peeked into the room, she paused for a moment, observing the scene. Ethan animated, Walter quiet, but visibly less tense. She slightly furrowed her brow, as if recognizing a subtle change in the air. "Good morning, gentlemen writers," she said, entering lightly. Ethan raised the sheet like a trophy. "I'm working on a book. He's teaching me with his silence." Walter snorted without anger. Silence is the best teacher. Nina smiled with her eyes. "As long as there's a willing student to listen, isn't that right?" Ethan laughed and returned to the papers. At the end of the hallway, Leonard walked hurriedly, his eyes glued to his phone screen. He suddenly stopped upon receiving a new message and read its content with a stern expression. In a few seconds, he turned and headed straight for the hospital administration. There, with a firm voice, he claimed that for technical reasons, Walter's accommodation would need to be changed. There's been a pending request since his admission. He needs to be transferred. The person in charge hesitated, but Leonard insisted, showing a notification on his device. It's an administrative decision. It must be carried out as soon as possible. He returned down the hallway with the same firm stride. His eyes didn't hide his cold satisfaction. Nina received the news at the ward entrance and stood still for a few seconds. Change rooms now? And where will he go? The assistant mumbled something about another sector. Nina shook her head resolutely. This is absurd. Walter is finally accepting company. I won't allow this progress to be broken by suspicious bureaucracy. She strode quickly to the control station and demanded explanations. Leonard emerged shortly after. "We're just following orders. It's not up to the nurses to contest structural changes." Nina looked at him firmly. "I'm not a piece for you to move on your board, Leonard. I take care of people." The tension mounted as Walter, who until then had listened in silence, unexpectedly raised his voice. "I want to stay where I am." Everyone turned at the same time. Leonard tried to regain control of his expression. "You're not in a position to comment on internal logistics." Walter raised his head slightly. "I'm dying, not deaf, and I'm not a package to be pushed from one side to the other." Nina seized the opportunity and approached. "He wants to stay, and I fully support him." Leonard took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "Of course, if that's what the patient desires, we'll do our best." And he left with restrained but visibly tense steps. The atmosphere in the room seemed lighter after Walter's unexpected declaration. Ethan, still with the papers in his hands, approached him carefully. "That was the first time you raised your voice, and it was beautiful," Walter shrugged. "I don't like unnecessary changes, and I like orders and commands even less." Ethan smiled. "I thought it was because of me." Walter closed his eyes for a moment. "Maybe a little. You talk too much, but you listen well." The boy sat down again and began to scribble. "Then I'll keep talking and listening until you get tired." The sound of the pencil filled the room again, but now Walter didn't mind. He observed the boy sketching letters on the paper out of the corner of his eye, as if drawing invisible paths. Ethan kept writing, driven by something he couldn't even name. This one is going to be about an old man who lived alone, and a boy who was afraid of being silent. Walter raised an eyebrow. "And what happens in the end?" Ethan stopped writing and smiled. "They discover that speaking and being silent are just different ways of asking for the same thing: company." Walter didn't respond, but his hand rested lightly on the blanket, in a looser gesture. Nina returned to the room shortly after, bringing a glass of water and a small packaged bread roll. She handed it to the boy with a smile. "I thought the writer might need some fuel." Ethan thanked her and bit into it eagerly, his eyes shining. Walter watched silently. "I don't remember the last time I ate bread and thought it tasted good." Ethan chewed slowly. "Everything tastes different when you feel you deserve to be there." Nina approached the bed, And you two deserve it. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Walter averted his gaze, but not with the same rigidity as before. She speaks as if we had a chance. The day continued with scribbles, comfortable silences, and few words exchanged. Outside, the corridor had returned to its usual routine, but in here time seemed to move differently. Ethan wrote until his hand grew tired, and Walter closed his eyes but didn't sleep. He just listened. Nina changed the equipment gently, attentive to everything. Leonard didn't return, but the effect of his failed attempt still lingered in the air, like a warning that not everything was resolved. Ethan looked at Walter and spoke simply. "I like this room because in it I became someone." Walter responded in a low voice, "And I became someone again." Night slowly settled in the room, bringing with it the weight of silence and the faint dance of the cardiac monitor light, which oscillated as if breathing along with Walter's tired body. Ethan slept curled up in the armchair, his head resting on his shoulder and the papers scattered on the floor. His breathing was light, peaceful, like someone dreaming of something they haven't yet experienced. Walter, however, began to stir, his eyes opening with difficulty and his mouth gasping for air, as if the room were closing in on him. The sound of the monitor changed rhythm. "It's too tight. It won't go in," he whispered, almost voiceless. Ethan woke with a start at the strange sound and immediately stood up. He saw Walter's chest heaving and his arms trembling. Hey, wait! I'll call someone, don't move!" He ran barefoot into the hallway, shouting for help. "Someone, quick!" "He's not well." The cold hospital light seemed more intense now, the sounds louder, the air thicker. A nurse appeared in the distance and quickened his pace, followed by another. Ethan held the door open with his body, pointing urgently. "In there, please, he can't breathe." The nurses rushed in, adjusted the cables, checked the equipment, and prepared the oxygen mask. One of them gave short instructions while the other checked the vitals. Nina came in shortly after, her face tense, not concealing her concern. "What happened?" she asked, even though she already understood. Ethan stepped back, his eyes wide. He woke up like that. It looked like he was drowning in his own air. Nina went to Walter, carefully touched his forehead and watched the beats on the monitor. "He'll stabilize, but he's weak, much weaker than before." Walter had his eyes closed, but he heard, "I'm still here, barely, but I'm here." Minutes later, the atmosphere was calmer, with the monitor returning to a controlled rhythm and the professionals leaving the room. Walter was breathing with difficulty, but his eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. Nina remained by his side, still alert, when he spoke in an almost inaudible voice. "I need paper. And a pen." Nina hesitated, exchanged a look with Ethan, and then grabbed the notepad next to the equipment. "Are you sure? You want to write now?" Walter nodded with effort. "I need to do this." Nina placed the materials on the nearby tray, awaiting instructions. Ethan approached slowly, his eyes shining. "Do you want help writing?" Walter gently turned his face away. "Thank you, but this I need to do alone." Slowly, Walter picked up the pen and rested his trembling fingers on the paper. The sound of the clock on the wall marked the passing of minutes, interrupted only by the light scratching of the pen gliding. Each letter seemed to demand a disproportionate force from his already exhausted body, but he continued. Ethan stood still, watching in silence as if witnessing something sacred. Nina observed from a distance, respecting his time. "I've never seen anyone so determined by a blank sheet," Ethan whispered, almost breathless. "It's not a blank sheet. It's a story about to be told." Walter wrote slowly, but without stopping. Sometimes he would release the pen for a few seconds, close his eyes as if searching for the right phrase within his own memory, and then resume writing. The paper filled with curved strokes, firm letters despite the tremor. The sound of the pen was soft but constant. Nina remained standing, not interrupting. Ethan, his eyes fixed on the sheet, said nothing. Time seemed to have lost its hurry within that room. Walter finally stopped, took a deep breath and looked at the filled sheet. "It's done. That's what I needed to leave." Ethan pressed his lips. "Is it about you?" Walter shook his head. "It's about us." With slow movements, Walter folded the sheet and placed it inside a slightly crumpled envelope. He ran his finger along the flap before carefully sealing it. His eyes seemed clearer now, as if they had removed an invisible weight. He extended the envelope to Nina, holding it firmly for a moment before letting go. Nina took it gently, sensing the old man's intense gaze. "Do you want me to keep it?" Walter shook his head slowly. "I want you to understand. But not now." Ethan approached and tried to peek. "Is it a secret?" It had the scent of something important. Walter closed his eyes, smiling slightly. "Some secrets are just truths waiting for the right time." Nina put the envelope in her lab coat pocket without asking questions. Walter adjusted his body in the bed, visibly more exhausted than before. Ethan pulled the covers up to his chest and stood there, as if he wanted to protect that moment from time. "Are you going to rest now?" Walter gestured with his hand, asking for silence. "Just for a while." Ethan sat back in the armchair, looking up at the ceiling. "When you wake up, I'll want to know the end of that story," Walter replied without opening his eyes. "Maybe you already know." Ethan rested his chin in his hands. "I think we always know, but we need to hear it from someone's mouth." The heart monitor continued its silent work, marking each beat with precision. Walter fell asleep shortly after, his face more peaceful than usual. Nina turned off the main light in the room, leaving only the soft glow of the table lamp. Ethan closed his eyes but didn't sleep. His thoughts revolved around that envelope, the way Walter held it, the words that were left unsaid. "I think there's something in there that could change everything," he thought, and then he whispered to himself almost like a promise. "I'm going to protect this, even without knowing what it is." And he stayed there, keeping watch over the night with the eyes of someone who had already understood the value of silence. Morning came without ceremony, invading the room with a pale and cold light that touched the white walls and sheets with the same indifference. Ethan woke up slowly, feeling his body aching from the poorly slept night. He sat up in the armchair, stretched his arms out and immediately frowned. The room felt strange, a sound was missing. The faint sound of breathing was gone, that irregular and tired rhythm that came from the bed beside him. He looked over quickly, his heart racing, and saw Walter's motionless body, his eyes closed and chest still. "Mr. Walter," he called out, his voice trembling. He rose slowly, as if any sudden movement could undo what he did not want to believe. He walked to the edge of the bed and observed closely. Walter's face was serene, like someone resting from an immense burden. But there was something definitive there, an absence that could not be filled even with time. Ethan took a step back and felt the cold floor under his feet. "Sir, you're really not going to open your eyes?" he whispered, his eyes watering. The door creaked behind him, and Nina entered with slow steps, holding the envelope against her chest. Her face was dejected, and words did not come. She walked up to Ethan and stopped in front of him, holding the envelope with both hands. She carefully handed it over, but without saying a word. The boy took it with a frightened look, then looked at Walter's body. Nina tried to speak, but only shook her head, powerless. Ethan clutched the envelope to his chest and walked to the corner of the room, sitting on the floor. He opened it with trembling hands, taking a deep breath. He said it was important, and now I understand why. He began to pull the sheets out one by one, with the care of someone handling something sacred. The reading began with heavy words. Walter spoke of losses, regrets, and choices that led him to live hidden behind walls he had built himself. Ethan read slowly, his eyes filling with astonishment. With each line, a new truth was revealed. Walter spoke of companies, of a silent fortune, of accounts and scattered properties that had never been exposed. He was rich, but he chose to die as if he were nobody. Ethan squinted, breathing with difficulty, and yet he chose to leave this to me. Why? Among the papers were more formal documents. A complete will, with a recognized signature, recent dates, and legal stamps. Along with it, a clear term of transfer of assets. Walter's signature was on every page. In the end, a clause stated that Nina would be Ethan's legal guardian until he came of age. The boy read everything in silence, trying to understand every word. Is this all real? Did he leave everything to me? Nina knelt beside him, taking the documents and carefully reading through them. It seems he trusted us more than anyone else. Hours later, Nina walked through the door of a small law firm with the papers in hand. Thomas Blake greeted her with a solemn nod and led her to the desk. He read the documents in silence for long minutes, his brow furrowed, his expression a mix of surprise and reverence. "I've known Walter for many years, but I never imagined he would leave something like this. This will is legitimate. Everything is validated." Nina nodded, still shaken. He didn't want anyone to know beforehand, but he knew exactly what he was doing. Thomas carefully closed the folder. "This will change that boy's life, and yours too." Meanwhile, in the hospital parking lot, Leonard received a copy of the letter in an anonymous envelope. He opened it right there, leaning against a pillar, and read it with his jaw clenched. Each line made him tenser. When he reached the final section, which stated the transfer of assets and Nina's name as guardian, he crumpled the paper forcefully. His eyes burned with rage. He looked around, making sure no one saw him, and kicked a trash can, spilling papers everywhere. "This isn't going to stay like this," he muttered through clenched teeth. Leonard took out his phone and walked to a more isolated corner of the building. He called someone in the hospital administration, speaking in a restrained but charged voice. "There's something wrong with that nurse. She got what she wanted by manipulating a sick old man. There are documents, assets involved. This needs to be reviewed urgently." He paused, listening to what was being said on the other end. "Yes, I can send copies. And if needed, I can file a formal complaint." He hung up forcefully and stood still for a few seconds, staring blankly into space. She thought she'd win, but I'm still here. The next morning, 2 court officers discreetly entered the hospital reception and asked to speak with Nina. She went down to the lobby and was surprised with a notification. Upon reading its contents, her hands trembled. Ethan's guardianship had been temporarily suspended based on an anonymous complaint of misconduct. The boy had to be taken to a shelter until the case was judicially analyzed. "This is a mistake. I'm the court-appointed guardian named in a legitimate will." One of the officers merely nodded, indicating they were there just to carry out the order. "You can legally protest, but the boy has to come with us." Overhearing the conversation in the hallway, Ethan ran towards Nina, grabbing her arm. "They're going to take me away. I didn't do anything wrong." Nina knelt and hugged him tightly. "I know. I'll sort this out, I promise." The boy's eyes were filled with tears, his face frightened. "But I just wanted to stay with you. He trusted us. He really trusted us." One of the officers approached and gently touched Nina's shoulder. "We have to take him now." Ethan was slowly pulled away. His steps dragged, his eyes still turned towards her. "Please, don't take long to come get me." And the door closed behind him, taking with it everything Walter had left in the right hands. The van stopped in front of an old building with peeling walls and windows covered by rusty bars. Ethan got out silently, shoulders hunched, holding Walter's envelope against his chest, hidden under his shirt. The gate creaked open, and the shelter's interior revealed a noisy, muffled environment, smelling of mold and spoiled food. Small children shared space with teenagers, and even some lost-looking adults. An employee nodded towards a door at the back. "Go to room 5, and remember, no one here is special." Ethan followed, swallowing hard. "But someone believed I was," he thought, his eyes fixed on the ground. The communal room was a narrow, poorly ventilated space, with thin mattresses strewn over wooden bunks. A slowly spinning ceiling fan lacked the strength to dispel the stifling heat. Ethan was pushed inside, and the door slammed shut behind him. He sat on the edge of a bed and took a deep breath. Loud voices, dry laughter, and distrustful looks surrounded him. He discreetly lifted his shirt and adjusted the envelope tucked inside, clinging to his body. "If anyone finds this here, I lose everything." He lay on his side, clutching the paper. "He trusted me, and I won't let them take that away." At the hospital, Nina strode down the corridors with firm steps. Her gaze was focused, her expression tense. She stopped in front of the security room and asked to speak with Patrick. The security guard, a man who had worked there for many years, appeared minutes later, looking around as if he had been expecting this conversation. Nina was direct. "I need the footage from the day Walter gave me that envelope." Patrick hesitated. "I can't help you with that." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He averted his gaze. "The recordings from that day were lost. A system failure. Just on that day. The silence between them was heavy. Nina crossed her arms, staring at him. Are you sure that's not something that just disappears? Patrick rubbed his hands. That's what I was told. I don't have access to the backups. She took a step forward. Patrick, you were there. I know you remember what you saw. He merely shook his head, his eyes avoiding hers. I can't help you, that's all I know. Nina observed his restless posture and perceived his discomfort, but she understood that insisting at that moment would yield no results. Okay, I'll find another way. She turned and left the security guard motionless in the hallway. If he's lying, one day he'll talk, and I'll be ready to listen. That night, Nina returned home with a feeling of helplessness weighing on her chest. She tossed her bag onto the couch, sat at the table, and spread Walter's documents across the wooden surface. She called her lawyer and explained the situation in a firm voice. I need to accelerate the validation process. There are people trying to erase evidence. Thomas listened attentively and assured her he would take action. Nina hung up and began reorganizing Walter's papers, running her hands over the sheets as if searching for hidden clues. You knew they would try to stop me. That's why you left everything ready for me. She took a deep breath. Now it's my turn to protect this. The next morning, she returned to the hospital with a single objective: to review Walter's medical records. She requested full access to the medical logs and spent hours analyzing notes, schedules, and prescriptions. Cross-referencing the data, something caught her attention. There was a serious inconsistency in the administration times of one of the medications. According to the records, a drug was administered shortly before Walter's condition worsened, despite an earlier opinion advising against it. Who authorized this? She murmured. Flipping through a few more pages, she found Leonard's signature. Of course it was you. She took out her phone and photographed the most relevant pages. With all the documents in hand, Nina left the hospital without saying a word to anyone. Once home, she scanned the files and emailed them to Thomas. Along with the images, she wrote a clear message. We have sufficient grounds to open an investigation into negligence and misconduct. A few minutes later, the lawyer replied, This could become something big, but it needs to be handled strategically. Nina set her phone down on the table and stared at the envelope still tucked away in the drawer. He didn't die in peace for all of this to be forgotten, and I won't let them destroy what he built. Meanwhile, at the shelter, Ethan remained silent in the corner of the room, not interacting with the others. The envelope remained hidden under his shirt, clinging to his chest like a fragile armor. At night, when the lights went out, he lay on his side, his eyes open in the dark. He heard footsteps, distant voices, and a cry coming from another room. The mattress was hard, the smell of the room was strong, and the noises didn't stop. He pressed the envelope against his chest and squeezed his eyes shut tightly. If she promised to get me out of here, I believe her. I just need to hold on. He missed the silence of the room, the sound of the monitor, and Walter's tired voice. Ethan remained awake for hours, reliving the words of the letter. He remembered every sentence, every curve of the letters. He thought about the way Walter held the pen, how he breathed between one line and the next. He didn't write that to be forgotten. He knew I would need strength. The envelope seemed to warm his frail body, even in that cold, affectionless place. They think they've won, but they've only gained time, because the truth will come back. He squeezed his eyes shut once more, not letting a single tear fall. He was there whole because of a man who believed in him when no one else wanted to look, and for that reason, he wouldn't give in. Not now. Not ever. In the lawyer's office, the air was charged with expectation and urgency. Nina opened the folder with steady hands and spread the documents across Thomas's desk. The medical records were organized by date, with notes made by her indicating the obvious contradictions in Leonard's prescriptions. Thomas ran his eyes over the pages, checking each detail with increasing attention. After finishing his reading, he pushed his glasses up his nose and spoke with conviction. This is serious. It could constitute medical negligence, perhaps even malpractice. Nina crossed her arms, determined. Then let's move forward. I'm not stopping now. Based on the documents provided by Nina, Thomas drafted the formal request to open a judicial investigation. The text included evidence of medical errors, omissions, and the use of contraindicated medications. He then requested a new hearing with the judge overseeing Ethan's custody case, attaching the new evidence. We need to show that this case is not isolated and that there is a clear attempt to conceal evidence. Nina followed every word with attentive eyes. Walter trusted me with this and I won't let him down. Thomas signed the last paper and stood up. Now it's up to the judge, but we have a strong case. Before leaving the office, Nina asked that not only the medical evidence be attached to the case, but also Walter's letter, his will, and the complete history of inconsistent conduct recorded by other hospital professionals. Thomas nodded in agreement. The more documentation, the better. Everything legitimate will be considered. Nina rested her hands on the table and took a deep breath. This man used the hospital as a shield. It's time to tear down that wall. Thomas gathered the papers and squeezed her hand. We'll expose everything, but you need to be prepared for retaliation. Nina smiled firmly. I already am. Meanwhile, at the shelter, Ethan remained silent in the corner of the dining room, the envelope still hidden under his clothes. Two staff members conversed near the door, believing he couldn't hear them. That doctor's case has caused problems before, but it never went anywhere. The other responded in a low tone. Now there's that woman. They say she's going to bring him down. Ethan raised his eyes attentively, without showing any reaction. He stood up silently and returned to the shared room. So she's really fighting, and he's afraid. That changes everything. At the hospital, Leonard received the official notification from the court. The sealed envelope was delivered into his hands, and he opened it right there in front of the control panel in the administrative wing. As he read the contents, his expression changed abruptly. The hearing had been accepted, and the judge demanded his personal presence in court. Furthermore, it informed him that other cases under his responsibility would be re-evaluated. Leonard crumpled the sheet forcefully, his teeth clenched. They want to paint me as the villain, but they forgot who's in charge here. He threw the paper onto the desk and left the office with heavy steps. By the end of the afternoon, the hospital's management gathered to assess the impact of the allegations. The presence of official documents, tampered medical records, and an imminent court hearing forced the administration to act. Leonard was summoned and informed of his precautionary suspension until the conclusion of the internal investigation. His expression was one of disbelief. You're yielding to the pressure of an unhinged nurse. The response was direct. We're protecting the institution. The decision is final. Leonard left the room without greeting anyone. She dug my downfall, but she'll fall with me. At Nina's house, night had already set in when she returned from the street with a bag of additional documents. She was about to open the door when she noticed a figure standing by the gate. It was Patrick. The hospital security guard looked tired, his posture hunched and his eyes restless. She approached slowly. Patrick, did something happen? He looked around before speaking, his voice low. I need to talk. There are things you need to know. Nina frowned but nodded. Then come in. I'm listening. Patrick took a deep breath. I lied, and I can't carry this burden anymore. The game was about to turn, and this time, with evidence. Patrick looked around as if he expected to be followed. His hands were trembling, and his forehead covered in a cold sweat, even with the light evening breeze. Nina kept the door ajar, observing his restlessness. He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and held it as if carrying something scorching in his hands. I lied, Nina. The images from that day weren't deleted. I hid them. She didn't respond immediately, only fixed her eyes on him. Leonard threatened me. He said I'd lose everything if I cooperated with you. Patrick lowered his eyes. But now I don't want to be part of this anymore. Nina took the flash drive with both hands, with delicacy and contained emotion. Her eyes welled up as she closed her fingers over the small object that could now change everything. Patrick averted his gaze, his voice still trembling. I hid this behind the maintenance cabinet. No one knew. I was just afraid. Nina took a deep breath, mastering the turmoil within her. Thank you for coming. You can still fix part of what they did. He nodded without saying anything else and left silently. Nina slowly closed the door, pressing the flash drive against her chest. This is it, Walter. The time has come for the truth to appear. Without wasting time, Nina called Thomas. His voice sounded alert on the other end of the line. "I have something important. A flash drive with the images. Patrick confessed everything. Leonard lied." Within minutes, the two were sitting side by side in the lawyer's office, the computer screen illuminating their attentive faces. Thomas connected the device and opened the recording. The image was clear. Walter, still lucid, sitting on the bed, handed the envelope to Nina. Ethan was by his side, watching. Walter's voice was firm. "Keep this. When I'm no longer here, it will be your responsibility." Nina closed her eyes. He knew everything. Thomas paused the video and looked back at her. "With this, we have more than evidence. We have recorded truth." Nina kept her gaze fixed on the screen. He left everything ready, and trusting this was the last gesture of someone who only wanted justice. The lawyer copied the images onto a new device and printed out the main frames from the scene. "We need to attach this to the case immediately. The judge needs to see this before the hearing." Nina nodded, determined. It's no longer just about custody. It's about clearing the name of the one who had the courage until the end. Thomas looked at her with respect, and about getting Ethan out of the place he should have never been. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was silent when the judge entered. The dark robe moved slowly as he sat down, and his eyes scanned the faces present. Thomas stood up with the documents in hand and presented the new evidence. He showed the doctored medical records, the testimonies, and finally played the video delivered by Patrick. The judge watched every second of the recording attentively. At the end, he crossed his arms and took a deep breath. It's clear there was an attempt at obstruction, and it's clear who was on the side of the truth. Nina kept her gaze steady. "I'm not his mother, sir, but I promised someone I would do everything right." The judge remained silent for a few seconds, then looked over the papers in front of him. He then declared the decision in a firm voice. "I grant provisional custody of Ethan to Mrs. Nina. He must leave the shelter immediately and return to her care." Nina closed her eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over her. Thomas smiled discreetly. "It's still provisional, but the hardest part is over." The judge finalized, banging his gavel. "This court will also notify the public prosecutor's office about the evidence of criminal conduct by the Dr. Leonard. The prosecution will assess the next steps." Nina nodded. "Thank you for listening to what many wanted to silence." Outside the courthouse, Thomas accompanied Nina to the sidewalk, his face serious. "I was informed by a source from the forum that the prosecution will include formal charges against Leonard." Nina stopped walking and stared at him. "Of what kind?" Thomas answered without hesitation. "Moral harassment, ideological falsehood, and attempted obstruction of justice." She crossed her arms. "All of this happened right under the hospital's nose, and no one did anything." The lawyer placed his hand on her shoulder. "But you did. And now everyone is seeing it." Nina looked up at the sky, her voice low. "Ethan will come home and Walter will rest in peace." Meanwhile, at the shelter, Ethan was still lying in the corner of the bed, clutching the envelope, when a staff member entered the room and called out to him. "Someone is waiting for you. They say you're leaving." The boy sat up slowly, his heart racing. He carefully put the envelope away and left the room with quick steps. At the gate, he saw Nina standing, with a coat in her hands and teary eyes. She waited for him with open arms. "Let's go home, Ethan." He ran without thinking and threw himself into her embrace. "I knew you would come back. I believed it the whole time." Nina held the boy tightly against her chest. "Now, no one will separate us ever again." And the two left that place as if crossing the end of a nightmare. The shelter's gate opened slowly, with a long creak that seemed to announce the end of a bitter story. Ethan took his first steps outside, holding the envelope firmly against his chest, his watchful gaze searching for the only person who still made sense in that confusing world. Nina was waiting for him outside, with a coat in her hands and tears held back in her eyes. They didn't say a word when they met. They just hugged each other tightly, their faces hidden in each other's shoulders. "I knew you would get me out of there," he whispered. Nina responded without letting go of her arms. "And now no one will ever put you back." The following days were taken over by an avalanche of news. Printed newspapers, television channels, and website pages displayed headlines about Leonard's downfall. The scandal gained strength with Patrick's formal denunciation, in which he admitted to lying about the images and confirmed that he had been coerced. The accusations were clear: moral harassment, ideological falsehood, attempted obstruction of justice. In the hospital corridors, the murmurs gave way to the heavy silence of realization. He controlled everything. Now he'll need a good lawyer. Nina read each headline calmly but without pleasure. What matters is that no one will suffer in silence anymore. Shortly after, the hospital published an official statement declaring Leonard's definitive dismissal. The statement acknowledged the serious flaws and the need to review internal protocols. The text also stated that measures were being taken to prevent future abuses. Nina received the news with a mixture of relief and pain. It doesn't fix what he did, but it prevents him from continuing. Ethan, by her side, asked softly, "Will the other people he hurt also be okay?" Nina looked at the boy with tenderness. "We'll do our best for that. Now that the truth has come out of the shadows, it can shed light on more people." Days later, Nina was called to the hospital's main room. There, professionals from different areas awaited her with respectful looks and contained applause. She received a tribute from the internal community, with sincere words of recognition for her courage in facing the system. They said her strength had opened doors for real changes. Nina held the small trophy in her hands and spoke with a choked voice. "I didn't fight for glory. I fought for justice. And I'll keep fighting because there are still many people needing a safe place." Ethan, who was waiting for her in the hallway, hugged her tightly when she came out. "You were my courage when I only had fear." At the end of that afternoon, the two arrived at Walter's mansion. The gate creaked as if awakening from a long sleep. Ethan walked slowly through the rooms, observing every corner with the eyes of someone still trying to believe that all of this was real. He went up the stairs and entered the library, where the old man's manuscripts were stacked, protected by a blanket. He carefully removed the cloth and ran his fingers over the handwritten pages. He spent his life writing. And now these words are here, waiting for someone. Nina came in right after and observed him in silence. "And you are that someone." Ethan sat on the floor and began organizing the papers. There are complete stories. There are loose ideas. There are pages with just one sentence, but everything has value. Nina crouched down beside him. "What do you intend to do with this?" The boy raised his eyes, a sparkle in his gaze. "I want to turn this into something beautiful. Something that helps other children, just like he helped me." Nina smiled, gently touching his shoulder. "Then let's do it together." Ethan nodded. "This place won't be just a memory. It will be a new beginning for many people." They spent the following days planning. They gathered architects, volunteers, and social workers willing to contribute to the idea of transforming the house into a shelter for children in vulnerable situations. Ethan made sure to participate in everything, from the design of the rooms to the choice of colors. Nina took care of the legal side, ensuring that everything was regularized. "It will be a place where no one needs to hide," she said. Ethan added, "and where every story is heard, even if it's just beginning." The project grew stronger, as if carrying Walter's soul in every corner. That night, with the furniture still covered in cloth and the floor marked with fresh paint, Ethan and Nina entered the library together. The darkness enveloped them until Nina turned on the lights. The beams spread across the room, touching the books, the shelves, and the still dusty frames. Ethan took a few steps forward and stopped in the center of the room. "Before, all of this seemed too big for me. Now, it seems exactly the size it should be." Nina walked up to him, crossing her arms lightly. "You know why? Because now it makes sense." Ethan smiled, his eyes watering. "It really does, because now this is home. And home is where they believe in you." Time passed. The sun shone high over Walter's mansion, now unrecognizable. The newly painted facade displayed light colors, open windows, and light curtains dancing in the wind. The garden was filled with colorful flowers, pruned trees, and toys scattered across the lawn. Children arrived in groups, some hand in hand with volunteers, others walking alone, their big eyes admiring the new space. They stopped at the entrance, enchanted, pointing at the swings, the drawings on the walls, and the soft sound coming from a speaker. "This place is magical," a girl whispered. A boy replied without taking his eyes off the toys. "It looks like a dream come true." Volunteers guided the little ones with smiles and firm instructions. Painting workshops took place under white tents, with easels and paints available. Inside the hall, a reading circle began with books piled in the center. Musicians tuned their instruments outside, ready for a children's performance. Mothers watched from afar, some with discreet tears in their eyes. A woman held her son's hand tightly. "They never had a place like this," another replied softly with an emotional smile. "Now they do, because someone had the courage to build it." Nina walked among the spaces with a calm yet attentive stride. She wore simple and elegant clothes, with a badge pinned to her chest that said, "Director Nina." She received greetings, hugs, and words of gratitude with the same humility as always. She organized lines, calmed anxious children, and distributed instructions firmly. "We're opening the music room in 5 minutes," she told a volunteer, "and keep the library doors open. I want everyone to go in and get to know it." A lady approached and firmly shook his hand. "You changed everything on behalf of all of us, thank you." Nina responded with a restrained smile. "It was he who started it. I merely continued." Nearby, Ethan observed the commotion, holding the first copy of his illustrated book with both hands. He wore a light blue shirt, simple pants, and worn sneakers, but his posture was firm, his gaze direct. On the cover, the title in large letters. On the first page, a dedication, "For the one who taught me that stories never die." People approached, asking for autographs, photos, and conversation. Ethan attended to everyone with sincere shyness, a small smile, and simple words. "Thank you for being here. All of this is for you." Nina watched him from afar, pride in her eyes. He is no longer the same boy, but he remains whole. A brief pause interrupted the activities. Someone took the microphone and called Nina to the improvised stage. She smiled, embarrassed, and declined with a gentle gesture. Then she placed her hand on Ethan's back and gently pushed him forward. "Go. It's your turn." He hesitated but went up. He carefully adjusted the microphone, looked at the audience, and took a deep breath. "I wasn't born here, but it was here that I truly began." The silence was total. "Walter believed in me when no one else did. He gave me a role and a chance. It was then that a door opened, and with it an entire life was reborn." Applause filled the space, sincere and emotional. Ethan smiled and slowly descended, surrounded by small children. One of them approached, carefully holding a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Ethan without saying a word. Ethan opened and read it silently. It was written, with crooked and large letters, "I also want to be like you." He looked at the child, knelt down and said in a low voice, "Then come, we'll write this story together." The city streets seemed slower at the end of that afternoon, bathed in a golden light that cast long shadows on the ground. Ethan walked with firm yet calm steps, the book clutched tightly against his chest. He observed the familiar facades with attentive eyes, noticing details he had never noticed before. The wind tousled his hair, and the sound of dry leaves beneath his feet accompanied him like a discreet soundtrack. Everything seems smaller, or maybe it's just that I've grown on the inside. The hospital appeared ahead with the same structure as always, but now there were softer colors, clean windows, and a brighter entrance. Ethan paused for a moment and faced the building. He took a deep breath before entering, feeling the invisible weight of memory pressing against his chest. It no longer seems like a place of endings. Now it seems like a place of beginnings. He carefully pushed the door open and entered the lobby, hearing the soft echo of his own footsteps against the shiny floor. The corridors had been renovated, with fresh paint and organized signs on the walls. Some people passed by without recognizing him, while others waved discreetly. An older receptionist rose from her chair and smiled upon seeing him. "I remember you, the boy from the room at the end of the hallway." Ethan shyly returned the wave. That's where everything changed. He continued on his way, unhurried, like someone who knew exactly where he was going, even though each step hurt a little inside. Upon reaching the room, he stopped. The door was closed, but on it was now a small metal plaque with simple letters. A new life was born here. Ethan remained silent for a few seconds, then extended his hand and touched the plaque with his fingertips. His gaze became lost in the shine of the metal, and the sounds of the hospital seemed to slowly fade away. This is where he saw me, even before I knew who I was. He carefully pushed the door open and entered. The room was empty, clean, with light curtains swaying in the wind and freshly painted walls. The scent of cleanliness filled the air, mixed with something he couldn't name but recognized deeply. He walked to the center of the room and stopped, closing his eyes for a moment. Images appeared with clarity. Walter's silence, the trembling hand handing him the envelope, Nina's tight embrace in the hallway. He sat on the bench by the wall and slowly opened the book. The pages slid under his fingers until he found the illustration of that room. There it was, the bed, the window, the old man's silhouette, and the small figure of the boy beside him. Everything drawn with firm but delicate strokes, as if each line carried a memory. He smiled with teary eyes, looked up at the ceiling, and remained there in silence. If you're watching this, thank you for not letting me go unnoticed. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and heard for a few seconds the sounds of the memory. The heart monitor, the pen writing slowly, the voice saying, "Keep this." He rose calmly, closed the book, and walked back down the hallway. His steps echoed softly, firmly, without hesitation. He passed by familiar walls with a serene gaze, like someone who is no longer afraid of what once hurt. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply left the hospital with the same tranquility with which he had entered. As he crossed the main door, the sun touched his face with gentle intensity. He stopped on the sidewalk, raised his eyes, and smiled. The past is still with me, but now it pushes me forward. He hugged the book to his chest and continued walking, like someone who knows the next story is already waiting for a new page. And this time, he would write every line by his own choice. Did you enjoy Ethan and Nina's story? Then subscribe to the channel, comment on which city you're watching this beautiful story from, leave your like, and check out the next one waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.